Have you ever heard of someone who died, met Jesus face to face, and then came back with an urgent message for all of humanity? What if I told you that this message brings a specific date that could change the course of history? June 20th, 2025. In this video, you will hear the impressive story of Evelyn Carter, a woman who was between life and death and was led to see the possible destinies of the earth. Judgment or miracle, chaos or redemption. Get ready, because what she saw will give you goosebumps and maybe even wake you up spiritually. Before you start, like it, subscribe to the channel for more impactful stories like this one, and comment below which city you are watching this video from. Let's spread this urgent message together. I was in the emergency room at Chicago Presbyterian Hospital, and I don't remember the exact moment my heart stopped. I was 42 years old, and my body, exhausted from fighting a massive infection, had finally given out. I remember flashes of light, the sound of machines beeping in despair, and the sensation of a strange warmth coming from my feet. And then, silence. But it wasn't an empty silence. It was as if the entire universe had stopped to listen to something important. The noise of pain disappeared, and in its place came a calm that was impossible to explain. My physical body was left behind like an old garment discarded in a corner, and I began to rise, or at least that's how it felt. I was floating toward a distant light that was beating like a living heart. It didn't hurt the eyes. It was warm, enveloping, welcoming. I soon realized I was not alone. I could feel presences all around me, but I could see no faces. Just shapes made of energy, like shadows lit from within. One of these shapes stood out. It was larger, more intense. As it came closer, I understood at once. It was Jesus. Not the Jesus of the paintings, but a living, indescribably powerful presence surrounded by a golden and white light that seemed to contain stars. He spoke without words, but his voice echoed directly within me. Do not be afraid. I have something you need to see, something urgent. Suddenly, the space around us changed. We were in something that felt like a time gallery, as if the sky had rooms with windows to different moments on Earth. And then I saw it. A date floated before me, made of fire and light at the same time. June 20th, 2025. The number burned into my soul like a sacred seal. I felt fear, but also an inexplicable responsibility. Jesus looked at me, and without moving his lips, he said, "This day will mark humanity. What will happen depends on what you choose now. I will show you what is coming." It was at that moment that my spirit began to tremble. As Jesus stretched out his hand, a circular light opened before us, as if the sky itself had torn away the veil of time. I was pulled into the opening and found myself floating above the earth. But it was not the present, it was the future. And the date, like an invisible stamp on the sky, glowed bright red. June 20th, 2025. The first scene I saw was on a map. The United States was shaking. But it was no ordinary earthquake. It was something deeper, as if the spiritual ground of the nation was cracking. Entire states were covered in black clouds, and these weren't weather clouds. They were thick, charged, with a living, conscious darkness. I heard muffled screams, moans, and silence. The same silence that had enveloped me in death. But now it was heavy with despair. Jesus stood beside me, watching everything with eyes of sadness and compassion. He pointed to the people in the scene. Many were locked in their homes, clinging to their cell phones, while others walked in despair through the streets, looking up at the sky. Then I saw something shocking. Thousands of churches closed. Pastors in crisis, confused faithful, and a general abandonment of prayer. It was then that I heard Jesus' voice once again, firmly. This is the way if the world forgets to pray. The date I have shown you is a turning point. If they ignore it, spiritual chaos will become physical. The following images left a deep impression on me. I saw a large city, it seemed to be New York, plunged into darkness. A total blackout. But it wasn't just the electricity. It was as if the entire structure of civilization had been wiped out. People were running around, disoriented, and the sky was thundering nonstop. And then, the most frightening thing, I saw the rising waters in some coastal regions. The waves swallowed streets, cars, and people screamed for help, but help never came. My spiritual heart sank. I wanted to run away from those visions, but Jesus took me by the hand and said, "There is still hope. I want you to see the other side." At that moment, everything changed. A new window opened, and I saw the same day, June 20th, but with a different setting. Thousands of people kneeling in the streets, holding candles, praying in tongues, crying. Churches were packed. Children stood silently before altars. And then something miraculous. A light came down from heaven and rested on the Capitol as a spiritual crown over the nation. "This," said Jesus, "is the possible reality if my people will pray." Jesus led me into a wide valley that seemed to be out of time. To the left, all was desolation. To the right, there was a sunny field of flowers with people smiling, singing, and working together. But between the two sides was a portal of incandescent light, pulsing like a heart about to burst. It was the crossing point, and above it, that burning date floated again, June 20th, 2025. "This portal," Jesus said in a deep voice, "is the divider of time. What humanity will experience after this depends on what they do before." He took me closer to the dark vision. I saw world leaders arguing, not for peace, but for power. I saw angry crowds in the streets, political turmoil, economic collapse. An unseen hand seemed to pull the threads of chaos, as if it were all being engineered. But then I looked up and saw shadowy figures hovering over great cities, spiritual entities that fed on fear, division, and apathy. Some were in the US, Congress, others in the media, and many in homes. I wept as I looked at Jesus' face. His eyes were filled with pain. He pointed to a woman kneeling alone in the midst of the chaos. She did not stop praying. That is why her city will be preserved. And sure enough, around her was an invisible dome of light that kept her home in peace while everything else around her was falling apart. He then turned me toward the clear, bright vision. I saw the same woman from before, now leading a prayer group. People came from far and wide just to participate. "One true prayer can save thousands," he said. I saw schools becoming centers of intercession. I saw young people fasting. I saw hospitals being visited by angels. A spiritual rebirth was beginning, as if the earth were being anointed anew. Jesus looked me in the eye and said, "This battle is spiritual, but its effects will be physical. That is why every knee bent will be a brick in the reconstruction of the world. But if no one prays, this portal will close to the light and make room for judgment." The pain I felt at that moment was unbearable. I realized that the choice was in humanity's hands, but time was short. A sense of urgency grew within me, as if my spirit knew that this vision was more than a warning. It was a divine summons. As the light in the portal began to fade, Jesus told me, "You will return. But first you will see what will happen if this warning is ignored." The light from the portal slowly faded, as if heaven itself were saddened. Beside me, Jesus bowed his head for a brief moment. When he looked up again, there was a different glow in them, not of anger but of righteousness. It was as if the time for supplication was running out. "Now you will see what will happen if you do not pray," he said. And then everything went dark. I saw the world shrouded in a thick, gray, suffocating fog. Continents seemed withered. In the United States, major cities were covered in a thick layer of darkness, as if something had blocked out even the sun. Chicago, where I live, was unrecognizable. No power, no order, no peace. The streets were empty, and the silence was deathly. But there were eyes in the shadows. Not human eyes. They were evil presences, lurking, feeding on the lack of faith. Saw people going crazy, falling to their knees in despair, screaming for help that did not come. "Lord, why have you forsaken us?" But the sky was silent, a silence that cut like a razor. Jesus took me to Washington, D.C., and there I saw the Capitol crumbling, not physically but spiritually. It was as if the moral foundation of the nation had been ripped away. I heard demonic voices celebrating, and I saw that many hearts were hardened. Churches had been turned into empty warehouses, and broken crosses lay on the ground. But what scared me the most was the clock. High in the sky hung a huge clock with no hands, just a blinking red line. Each time it ticked, I felt a pain in my chest. "Time is running out," Jesus said. "Every tick is a soul lost, every minute is a cry unheard. If you do not cry out, if you do not watch, June 20th will bring a darkness that will last much longer than a day." I saw simultaneous storms rising across the oceans. The Atlantic roared like a wounded animal. Inland, fires ravaged forests, while in the sky, I saw a strange aurora, red and black. It was beautiful, but it brought death. The world seemed to groan as if the earth itself were saying goodbye to hope. I cried, begging for the vision to end. But Jesus told me, "Not yet. You need to see it through to the end, so that your voice will be strong when you return." That moment I understood. This was the reality that awaited the world if we did not take the warning seriously. This was not just about prayer. This was a spiritual war that required sacrifice, vigilance, and repentance. And the date kept burning in my soul. June 20th, June 20th, June 20th. After the final vision of destruction, the sky tore open with a deafening clap of thunder. Everything around me shook, not like an earthquake, but as if the very fabric of reality was being torn apart. I fell to my knees, helpless, shaking with fear. And then came the sound. A colossal voice, like 1,000 thunders strung together, yet soft, as a mother's whisper echoed in my spirit. "Get up. Time is not up yet." When I looked up, I saw Jesus again, but now he was different. His appearance was imposing, clothed in glory, eyes like fire, and in his hand was a scepter made of living light. Behind him, I saw rows of angels, silent, in formation. And then I understood. This was a heavenly call of spiritual warfare. Jesus looked at me deeply. "You will return to the world of men with a mission. But first you will see the power of true prayer." He reached out again, and I was enveloped in a stream of light that transported me to another scene. It was the same world, but now it was full of movement. The scene had completely changed. I saw people rising at dawn to pray, families gathered in living rooms crying out with one voice, teenagers evangelizing in the streets, and churches opening their doors day and night. A spiritual fervor like I had never seen before was taking over the United States. In Los Angeles, I saw a crowd praying in front of movie studios. In New York, Times Square was filled with worship. In Dallas, an entire stadium filled with believers, crying out for the day June 20th. And it was at that moment that I saw the sky respond. Cracks of light opened above the cities. Golden rays descended like heavenly rivers, touching the heads of those praying. From above, thousands of resplendent figures appeared, angels descending to earth in response to collective intercession. And when one of them touched the ground, a wave of healing and deliverance swept through entire neighborhoods. The contrast with the previous sight was unbelievable. Jesus told me, "These are the fruits of obedience. What the world will experience depends on the decision of each soul. The power of collective prayer is like a tide. It can lift or sink a nation." My spirit was filled with hope. I saw families restored, hospitals emptied of disease, schools becoming centers of revival. But all of this was subject to fidelity until the appointed day. It was not superstition. It was spiritual obedience. It was covenant. As the vision slowly faded, I felt time shorten. I knew I was about to return, but there was still more to see. In the center of that spiritual plane, I saw the celestial clock reappear. Now it was no longer without hands. One of them moved slowly as if each second were a lament, a choice being made. The hand glowed red, pure and living blood, and with every movement, I felt the weight of human decisions. Jesus pointed to him and said, "Time waits not. Every sincere prayer slows down judgment. Every negligence hastens it." It was then that something even more profound was revealed to me. The clock was linked directly to human hearts. Each beat of faith made the light shine a little brighter. Each beat of doubt darkened it. It was as if the entire fate of the earth was connected to this divine heart that beat above us. And in the center of the clock, the date. June 20th, 2025, now marked with a drop of blood that ran down like a tear. Jesus took me to a small town in the interior of the United States. There, a woman in her late 90s had been praying alone every day since 1982. I saw that their prayers had protected their city for decades, even without anyone knowing. It was as if she were an invisible pillar holding up the spiritual structures of that place. She never needed to see to believe, Jesus said. She just obeyed. I saw then that God did not count multitudes. He counted willing hearts. I saw an 8-year-old boy praying sincerely to save his school from a planned shooting. I saw a young man who had been involved with gangs change his life and convert dozens around him. All this before the appointed day. It was as if the sky was gathering small seeds before the great harvest. But I also saw those who mocked, people saying, "It's just another conspiracy theory," laughing at the warnings, ignoring the calls. Some religious leaders kept quiet for fear of appearing fanatical. Others twisted the message for personal gain. I saw temples becoming concerts. I saw a lot of distraction as the clock approached the center. Jesus simply said, "Faith without watchfulness is like a house without doors. The thief is already outside." And then I saw one last warning. The earth shook slightly as if preparing for something big. It was like a sigh before impact, and even the heavens were in tension. The angels waited. Heaven held its breath. And I, floating between the two worlds, understood more than ever. June 20th was not just a date. It was a watershed moment. Time was running out, and I knew my return was near. At that moment, I was led by Jesus to one last place before my return. It was like a heavenly judgment hall, but there were no thrones, no accusations. Just a great table of light where the prayers of the world were recorded. I saw names appearing and disappearing on it, millions of names as hearts turned or turned away from intercession. Jesus was silent for a moment, and the room was filled with a low sound, like a drum in the distance, a growing rhythm. And then he spoke. In this very moment, billions of choices are being made. Every second, the future changes. What you have seen are possible paths, but the time of decision is coming, and many are still asleep. I was pulled back down to the surface of the earth. Now I saw a spiritual panorama. Cities were shown from above, as if the sky were looking down with eyes of fire. Some were surrounded by walls of light. Others, completely vulnerable, with no spiritual covering whatsoever. And above each city floated a sort of marker. Ready, indifferent, rebel, alert, at war. In some, armed angels were positioned, awaiting orders. In others, I saw demons laughing and dancing on rooftops, spreading confusion and fear. It was one of the hardest scenes to bear. The line between protection and perdition was so thin, so dependent on people's choices. I also saw homes, entire families sleeping while the spirit world roared around them. I saw mothers crying out on their knees for their lost children. I saw fathers waking up in the middle of the night with their hearts burning, without understanding why. But it was the Spirit calling them to battle. And then Jesus showed me something that marked me forever. A red line that crossed the globe, from end to end. It started in Eastern Europe, passed through Jerusalem, crossed the oceans, and ended exactly in the United States. Above it, the number 2006 pulsed, like an activation code. "This is the line of intervention," he said. "If prayer breaks this line, the world will see a miracle. If not, they will see judgment." I felt an impossible weight to carry. How could we be so crucial and so unconscious at the same time? And then Jesus looked at me tenderly. "That is why you will return, to remind those who have forgotten, to light up what is extinguished, to announce the day that will decide the course of the earth. The visions began to fade. The sounds of the hospital slowly returned. But before everything faded away, I heard one last phrase from him, engraved in my soul. Tell everyone that heaven has already marked the day. It is up to you whether you will mark your knees. The last image before my final return was breathtaking. I saw a crowd dressed in white marching silently through the streets of several American cities. There were no signs, no shouts, only prayers. Some whispered, some sung, many in heavenly tongues. It was a spiritual march. They were not moving by human impulse. They were being led by the Holy Spirit himself. Jesus explained to me, "These are the awakened ones. They heard my call and positioned themselves before the appointed day." The crowd was made up of all kinds of people: pastors, teenagers, ex-felons, single mothers, business people, artists, even atheists who had recently converted. What united them was not their past, but the fire in their eyes and the power of the words that came from their lips. I saw cities like Houston, Atlanta, and San Diego illuminated by columns of spiritual fire that rose to the sky, direct answers to those collective prayers. In California, a simple, nearly abandoned church had become the epicenter of a revival. Within days, thousands gathered to fast and cry out without cameras, without a stage, without an ego, just their hearts exposed before the Creator. And then something surreal happened. The celestial clock has stopped. The red needle stopped moving. For a moment, the whole sky was silent, waiting. It was as if that movement of prayer had suspended time. The spiritual forces of evil retreated in various parts of the globe. I saw demons screaming and fleeing, as if burned by the growing light. And where there had been darkness, signs of life began to sprout. Jesus then declared, "Prayer moves the deepest structures. It decides wars before they begin. It calms seas before the storm. But it is only effective when done with truth, sacrifice, and faith." However, not everyone had woken up. I saw entire regions still asleep, distracted by their own worlds. In Miami, I saw meaningless celebrations, luxury disguised as freedom. In Seattle, empty churches, abandoned by fear of human judgment. In Las Vegas, I saw a spiritual desert covering the skies like an acid cloud. The march of the intercessors, however, continued. And Jesus showed me that where this march passed, the judgment retreated. I've seen tornadoes diverted from their paths, fires suddenly put out, attacks thwarted for inexplicable reasons, all because someone, somewhere, was on their knees. When I looked up at the sky one last time, I saw a flaming inscription forming among the clouds. June 20th, the day of choosing. This was no longer just my mission. It was a divine summons to every human being, and inside me, something was ignited more strongly. I needed to go back, and fast. The sky began to slowly close, as if the curtains on a heavenly stage were being drawn back after the final scene. The light that had once enveloped me now grew more distant, as if it were being gently pushed away. Jesus, still in front of me, reached out his hand once more. His touch was warm, full of love and authority. "You need to go back now. They need to hear. They need to know." Suddenly, I was enveloped in a whirlwind of light that seemed to tear my soul in two. The pain was sharp, as if the full weight of what I had seen was being compacted inside me. I began to hear sounds again, the sound of machines, hurried voices, someone shouting, "She's coming back." It was the hospital, but something in me was still stuck up there. And in that brief moment between worlds, Jesus said something to me that I will never forget. Don't just tell what you saw, convey what you felt, the urgency, the clamor, the promise. I came back into my body with a jolt. It was like putting on a heavy, sweaty, tight suit. My soul wanted to stay there, but my spirit knew the mission was not yet accomplished. The doctors were shocked. I had been dead for almost 5 minutes, but I came back with stable signs. No one could explain how or why. But I knew. I knew very well. In the days that followed, I was unable to speak for a while, not because of injury, but because my lips trembled under the weight of what I witnessed. It was as if every word that came out of me carried echoes of eternity. When I finally managed to write, all I put was, "Pray. For the love of God, pray for June 20th. The sights, the sounds, the smells, they were all etched into me with frightening precision. I could still see the faces of the people in the protected cities, feel the warmth of the intercessors' hands, and feel the bitter cold of the places where repentance had not reached. My heart beat differently. Every time I looked at a calendar, my eyes would run to June 2025, and that date shone before me like invisible fire. 6. It burned my soul, as if it were a code engraved by heaven itself. Jesus' words echoed endlessly within me. They need to know, they need to choose. I had no doubt this mission was bigger than me, bigger than any individual life. It was a heavenly summons, a last chance, a line drawn between grace and judgment. And she's coming, swift, silent, decisive. Since my return, each day has been like walking with a heart on fire. There is not a single moment in which I forget what I saw, what I heard, what I experienced, in that place between life and eternity. The date remains with me like a living seal, June 20th, 2025. It is no longer just a future date, it is a present calling. I tried to live normally, but how can I live normally after talking to Jesus? How can I keep quiet after seeing multitudes on the brink of judgment, or miracles ready to explode in the sky, just waiting for a movement of faith? There is no room for silence when heaven has already cried out. What torments me most is not the judgment that may come. It is the certainty that it can be avoided. That he can be transformed in healing, in revival, in rebirth. I have seen it. I have felt it. What is coming is not an inevitable punishment, but a response proportionate to the choice of each heart. That's why I'm here. Not for fame, not for attention, but because the truth gives me no rest. Every beat of my heart pushes me to announce, pray, cry out, bend your knees. Teach your children to pray. Light the candles of faith. Rebuild the abandoned altars. The coming war will not be won with weapons, but with tears. Not with vows, but with vigils. Not with speeches, but with intercession. And the battlefield will be June 20th, 2025, an open window between heaven and earth, a portal that will decide not only the course of a nation, but of humanity itself. I remember the words of Jesus. If they pray, I will intervene. If they cry out, I will heal. If they believe, I will be with them. And now I repeat them to you. This is the last call. Don't wait for chaos. Be part of the answer. Do not doubt. Pray. Share. Wake up those who sleep. Shake up those who have forgotten. Because heaven has already decided that June 20th will be the day of selection. Now, the decision is in our hands. If you like this beautiful spiritual testimony, leave a like, comment your impressions, subscribe to the channel, and don't forget to activate the notification bell to watch each new video and help us spread this message to a greater number of people. Until next time.